All right, the book of Ecclesiastes. Another favorite book of mine, to which a lot of students are like, really, Dr. Wickman? Are you crazy? No, I really like this book. This is a cool book to me. Now, some of you are probably listening to this on a completely different day than the Book of Job lecture that I did. But for me, it's only been 10 minutes since I did the Job thing. So still on a roll, still on the whole peppy train here. So let's see if we can keep moving here. The book of Ecclesiastes is largely asking one central question. Just as Job asked the question, why does he suffer? Why does he suffer? What's the relationship between sin and suffering? Which, to recap, book of Proverbs says, relationship between sin and suffering. Good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. In the book of Job, sometimes bad things just happen even to good people. So just as Proverbs and Job had central questions that they were asking, Ecclesiastes has a central question that it's asking as well. And it's asking the question, why are you here, or what is the purpose or point of life? So we've got key concepts that will help us understand these particular issues. Okay, authorship issues. Hard to be peppy about authorship issues, but I'm going to do my best. So the book claims to have been written by the son of David, king in Jerusalem. And that definition or that description fits one person in human history, and that would be Solomon. So supposedly this book is written by Solomon. Now, modern day scholarship has called that into question, whether this is literally written by Solomon. There are a lot of books written in Solomon's name. Song of Solomon, the Wisdom of Solomon, which is not found in Protestant versions of the Old Testament. Solomon, because he's the wisest king in Israelite history, is closely associated with the Israelite wisdom tradition. And so it was common to write in Solomon's name when you're writing wisdom literature. As a result, modern day scholarship has looked at the book of Ecclesiastes and found that the themes in it fit much more closely in the post-exilic period, 500 years after Solomon has long been dead and buried. And so modern day scholarship says that the author of this book is Koheleth. That's going to be the correct answer on the test. Who wrote this according to modern day scholarship? Koheleth, bullet point 2. Koheleth is a Hebrew word that translates as either teacher or preacher. Well, why do we refer to this person? Well, look at the opening verse. Look at the opening verse of Ecclesiastes. The words of the preacher, or your translation may say teacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Modern day scholarship believes that this guy, Koheleth, the preacher, the teacher, has adopted the persona of Solomon and has written in honor of him in his name, although Solomon was probably long since gone. This is another example of pseudonymity. If you want to talk more about that, be happy to do so with you guys via Zoom or via email. All right, so that takes care of our authorship issues. Let's move on to the theme of this particular book. The theme of this book is life is meaningless. That's pretty crystal clear because the main recurring phrase in this book, and I'm going to explain that phrase to you guys in just a second here. The only question about the theme, though, is should we add the phrase "without God" to it? So, life is meaningless seems to be the main point. The question is, do we get to add the phrase "without God" to it at the very and that'll be dependent on how we understand and how we read the end of this particular book. All right, so let me explain then this refrain or this main recurring phrase that Ecclesiastes uses. Most translations will have Koheleth utter the word, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. The reason for that is one of the earliest English translations of the Bible is the King James Version. And some phrases from the King James Version are just poetic and nice, and they have a way of staying in our translations, even though the way that the King James Bible translated something doesn't necessarily make sense to us today. Now, when the King James Version was originally translated 400 years ago in 1609, I think, it was a wonderful translation. It was just fine. But English has changed. It was written during the Shakespearean era, and so just as we have a little trouble reading a Shakespearean play today, we get it if we work at it hard enough, but words have changed. The meaning of words have changed. For instance, one of the famous lines from Shakespeare's play is from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet is Juliet says, "Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" And she's up on her balcony pining for Romeo. And it sounds to our modern ears that she's saying, "Where are you, dude? Come visit me." But in reality, the word wherefore, that word means why. And so what she's really asking in that moment is, "Romeo, Romeo, why are you called Romeo? Why do you have this name Montague, which prevents us from getting together because my last name is Capulet?" All right, that's getting way too sidetracked there. So let's apply this to the Bible here. The word vanity, the way that it was used in the King James translation, it was used in the sense of fleetingness, something that did not last for very long. And so the New International Version of the Bible, I think, better than any other translation, really captures what Koheleth is trying to say here in modern day English. So whenever you see the phrase vanity of vanities, all is vanity, I want you to substitute in what the NIV says, which is meaningless, meaningless, all is meaningless. I think that is perhaps the most correct modern English translation of this particular Hebrew phrase. So what's going to happen in the book of Ecclesiastes now is that Koheleth, in the persona of Solomon, is going to go on a journey through his life as he searches for meaning. So the first place that he's going to go to look for meaning is going to be work. He is going to try to find meaning in work. And he's going to say, there is no meaning to be found in work. Why? Because it's repetitive. He's going to make the point that farmers do the same thing at the same time of year, year after year after year after year. And he makes a good point here, because there is a certain degree of repetitiveness in work. Many jobs do the same thing over and over and over again. Nursing majors out there, I know there's a lot of you out there. You are going to do the same kinds of things throughout the rest of your life. You're going to start thousands of IVs over and over and over and over again for the rest of your life. And if you're not doing IVs, you're going to be taking vitals. Oh my gosh, you are going to take so many vitals throughout your whole life. You're going to do the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. Accounting majors, if there's any of you out there, accounting majors, I promise I can tell you what you're going to be doing every day from January 1st through April 15th for the rest of your lives. Yes, you are going to be doing somebody else's taxes for them for those 4.5 months for the rest of your life. Those of you who might think, well, what if I went to grad school? What if I became a super important professor who teaches Old Testament? Then my life won't be repetitive because Dr. Wickman, you seem to live this wonderful, peppy lifestyle. But I have to tell you guys that even in the midst of a COVID-19 pandemic, am going to continue to teach the same Old Testament class year after year after year for the rest of my life. Work is indeed quite repetitive. And so maybe Koheleth's onto something here. Maybe there isn't meaning to be found in it. Maybe what our high school guidance counselors taught us, that we should find some sort of career that gives us satisfaction. Maybe that wasn't the best advice after all. Well, moving right along then. Maybe we could find meaning in wisdom. That's what Koheleth thought he could do. Perhaps he could find meaning in wisdom as well. But then he discovered that the more you know, the more you find out the world sucks. The COVID-19 crisis is a wonderful example of that right now. If you turn on the news, the only thing anybody's ever talking about right now is how messed up the world is right now because of coronavirus. And so the only way to avoid increasing in sorrow and learning more about how sucky things are getting out there is to turn off the news and not increase in knowledge and wisdom. And so Koheleth comes to the conclusion that, you know what, even if I did learn all that there was to learn, guess what's going to happen to me? I'm still going to the same place as the person who doesn't even who never goes to school a single day in their life. Whether I become the wisest person in the world or whether I know absolutely nothing and I'm a complete fool, you know what? We're all going to the same place. That 6 feet under, we're all going to become worm food. We're all going to die. And so Koheleth gives us what sounds like this little moment of hope, and he says, well, there's nothing for mortals to eat. There's nothing better than for mortals to eat and drink and find enjoyment in their toil. But if you remember what I taught you about how to read some of these speeches from the book of Job, they're not just dry, boring speeches. They're meant to have inflection to them. So what's the right way of reading this? There's nothing better for mortals than to eat and drink and to find enjoyment in their toil. Or does Koheleth sound a little bit more like this? There is nothing better for mortals than to eat and drink and find enjoyment in their toil. Thanks for noticing. Hope you all like my Eeyore voice there for a second. Because Koheleth is a little like Eeyore in this. He is quite depressive about all this. He is not trying to say, hey, let's go have fun and have a party and eat and drink and stuff like that. Instead, what he's saying is, the best we can possibly hope for is to go out to Arusha's for a drink of coffee after we're done with work today? That's the best we can do in life? That sucks. So, at this point, I would love to ask you guys, what do you think so far? Does Koheleth have a point? And I like to badger you guys into buying into what this guy has to say. And I usually get a couple of converts, and then I also have a couple of optimists in the classroom who insist, no, there is meaning to be found in life, Dr. Wickman. To which I say, okay, we're only 2 chapters into this. Koheleth's got some more stuff for you. Let's see what it has. Turning to chapter 3, perhaps the most famous part of the book of Ecclesiastes. The reason why it's the most famous part of it is because almost the entire thing was stolen by a British pop band from the 1960s known as the Byrds, who turned into a very peppy pop song called Turn, Turn, Turn. And what I'm about to read to you here are quite literally the lyrics to that song. They put it in a very peppy, upbeat tempo, and they say, there's a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, and a time to kill and a time to heal, and a time to break down and a time to build up. And it continues on. A time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. And then the Byrds add their one line in there. They say, I swear it's not too late. And so the whole thing you discover is an anti-war Vietnam protest song. The peppiness of their singing is wholly inappropriate to what Ecclesiastes is trying to communicate. He's not trying to encourage you. Instead, he's really trying to depress you. I would love to ask each and every one of you out there, are you in control of your life? At this point, some of you might dare to say, yes, Dr. Wickman, I'm in control of my life. I've chosen things for myself. To which Koheleth would say, really? Did you choose when to be born? No, I didn't think so. Do you get to decide when it's time to die? No, I didn't think so. You're not in control of anything. Do you get to decide when it's time to fall in love? No, your pheromones are going to do that for you. Do you get to decide when it's time to harvest crops? No, the weather and the plants are going to decide that for you. Some of you might say, yes, Dr. Wickman, but that's the ancient world. We are modern day people. I have chosen to be a nursing major, and I will give you that. True, you may have chosen to be a nursing major, but do you get to choose how to be a nurse? Do you get to choose what classes lead to you being a nursing major, leading into you getting through nursing school? No, 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 my friend. UMHB and the provost are going to choose that for you. We're going to insist you take A&P 1 and 2. There's no getting out of those. And so the point of this is to emphasize that we're not in control of our own lives. And since we're not in control of our own lives, don't try to find meaning in it. Don't try to find value in it. It's just life. That's just the way it is. And so just live it, enjoy it the best you can, but don't find meaning or purpose in it. All right, continuing on with the peppy theme. Hope you guys enjoyed that little bit of Mo Money, Mo Problems, because it's an extremely relevant song. Unlike the Byrds, who completely butchered the meaning of Ecclesiastes, Biggie Smalls gets it. He understands the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is going to go through, he's going to find that there is no value, there's no meaning to be found in justice because, hey, we see that the rich people buy fancy lawyers and they get off scot-free while poor people go to jail for petty little crimes here forever and ever. And then we also find out that, look, if you want to find meaning in God, well, there's a problem to be found there, because those who show off for God, those who um, draw God's attention to themselves, well, we see that their lives are oftentimes full of sorrow and problems because, well, all we have to do is just look at the Bible for examples. How about the prophets? The prophet Ezekiel, remember what he had to do? Oh, no big deal. He just had to cook food over his own, well, you know what, at this point. Well, okay, that's just one example, Dr. Wickman. Fine, let me give you another one. What about Jeremiah? Oh, his life was fine, except for getting arrested, coming within an inch of his life for preaching the word of God. Yeah, maybe calling God's attention to your life makes your life more difficult. And so then we come to what Biggie understands. Being rich doesn't make life problem-free either. Why? Because mo money, mo problems. Why is that the case? Well, the more money you have, the more people are going to try and take it from you. And the more you begin to worry about it, the more you begin to love your money and think, ooh, I have money. Let me figure out how I can keep it. And it consumes you, and you desire to possess it all the time. Your life becomes obsessed with it. So, Ecclesiastes at this point has discovered all kinds of problems with the things that we like to find meaning in, and none of them are working. And so now we come to the point in the class where I would continue asking students, does Koheleth have a point so far? What say you, Riley? Do you buy what Koheleth is saying, or do you stubbornly cling to the idea that life has meaning, that you can find some sort of purpose in there? Jody, do you agree with anything he's saying? What about you, Derek or Jalen? Do you think that there is still some meaning to be found in life? Kaylee, does he have any shortcomings in his argument? And we have to say, well, I mean, a lot of students really don't like what he's saying because they want there to be some sort of meaning in life. But at the same time, though, it's at this point in the class that at least most people seem to acknowledge, well, Dr. Wickman, he's not wrong. I just don't like what he's saying, and I'm hoping there's more to the story here. And yes, there is more to the story. So he's going to continue on. He's going to continue on to say that, look, you should just because life is meaningless doesn't mean that you shouldn't, try to have fun and enjoy life here. And you are going to have to account to God for your life, so don't go too crazy in your life. Have a little fun, maybe a youthful indiscretion or two, perhaps, but you're going to have to account to this for God when you get to the afterlife. And then he wraps things up. And we get to the end of this, chapter 12, starting in we get to chapter 12, verse 8, and he wraps everything up one last final time in which he declares, meaningless, meaningless, all is meaningless. And it sounds like that's the final point he wants to leave us with, that yeah, there really is no meaning in life. But then we have verse 9. And I want you to listen to what I have to say when I read this and see if you can catch something going on here. See if you can catch what's different about verse 9 versus the rest of what we've been reading so far. Besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge weighing and studying and arranging proverbs with great care. The preacher or Koheleth sought to find pleasing words, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. That's enough for there. Think about how the first 12 chapters of this have been presented to us. They've all been first person. Koheleth is the main speaker. All of a sudden now, in verse 9, we shift to a third person narrator. Koheleth is not talking anymore. This is an editor. This is somebody else who has come along after Koheleth and has added chapter 12, verses 9 through 14. So first thing I want you to know for test purposes is this. Chapter 12, verses 9 through 14 represent a later addition to the book of Ecclesiastes, not written by Koheleth. Okay, why does this matter here? Well, let's work through it. Listen to what he says in verse 10. The preacher sought to find pleasing words. Actually, let's reread verse 9. Let's start at 9. Besides being wise, the preacher also Besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging proverbs with great care. The preacher sought to find pleasing words, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. Stop for a second and think and answer this question for yourself. Does the editor agree with Koheleth or not? Yes or no? Pause for a second. Answer the question. Okay, now that you've unpaused and you've answered the question for yourself, and if you didn't, seriously, pause and answer the question for yourself. Now that you actually have answered the question for yourself, I hope that you've arrived at the answer of yes, he agrees with him. He calls him wise, he taught the people knowledge, and he says that he spoke words of truth. So the editor at this point agrees with the overall thesis, which is meaningless, meaningless, all is meaningless. But then notice what happens in chapter 12, verse 13. The end of the matter. All has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments. For this is the whole duty of man. That sounds a lot more like the message that we would expect to find in the Bible, which is to say, the meaning of life is to fear God, keep his commandments. That's it. To be obedient to God, to love God. Those are probably the kinds of things that you've heard in church before. And so I think we have to ask this question. How is it that the editor can say, yep, you're right, Koheleth, life is meaningless in verses 9 and 10, but then in verse 13, he completely contradicts what he has to say, and he says, there is meaning in life. The meaning of life is this. It's to fear God and keep his commandments. That's the whole duty of men. How do we reconcile these these different verses, these different passages? Here's my proposal to you guys. This is where I really wish we were together, because this makes for fascinating discussion. But here's my proposal. I don't think that chapter 12, verse 13 simply wipes out everything that we've read. It doesn't negate the previous 12 chapters and say, Koheleth is stupid, he's wrong. I don't think we can say that. It is sacred scripture. It is meant to be taken seriously. And the editor, whoever he or she was, agrees. Life is meaningless. And I think what the editor is suggesting to us by having this apparent contradiction is to say that, you know what, Koheleth is right. Because I would dare say that everybody goes through a period in their life. And if you haven't gone through one of these periods yet, you will. And I'm not wishing this for you, I'm just saying this is the way life is. Everybody goes through a period in life where you wake up and you say, life sucks. And somehow, some way, you're wondering, what's the point of this all? What's the point of life? What's the point of being a Christian? What's the point of doing these kinds of things? Is there meaning? Is there value? Is there purpose in my job, in what I do, in being a nurse, in being an accountant, in being an Old Testament professor? Is there meaning in their and purpose in continuing to be a Christian? And sometimes you're going to wake up in the morning and you're just going to shake your head and you're just going to be frustrated and you're just going to say, I don't see the point in this. And the beauty of the book of Ecclesiastes is that it is there acknowledging the validity of that feeling and saying that sometimes humans do go through those frustrating periods, those low moments, those dark nights of the soul. And the Bible is there to say, that's okay. It's okay to feel that way sometimes. But the editor then comes back and says, even though you may feel like there's no point in being a Christian, keep on being a Christian anyways. Because that is the meaning of life. And as a result of that, the book of Ecclesiastes acknowledges the difficulties of life, but does not encourage us to stay there forever. It's okay to feel that way for a period of time, but it also encourages us to move beyond that at some point and to come to the realization and understanding that there is value and meaning to be had in life with God. Hence, going back to slide 1 or 2 or whatever it was, what is the theme of this book? Absolutely, life is meaningless. But is life meaningless? But maybe the overall thrust, when we get at long last that last little verse, when we add that chapter 12 verse 13 in, maybe then we have permission to add in the little phrase, life is meaningless without God. All right. Hopefully continue to keep this peppy, although I did manage to keep it a little bit shorter than the Job one. Ironic that I am being peppy for Job and now this extremely depressing book of Ecclesiastes, but hey, maybe the irony makes the learning experience all the more fun. Hope you guys are doing well. We've got one more lesson after that, and it'll be the Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs, and then it's on to the final exam. Hope everybody is well. Talk at you again soon.